First, because we have such a short period of time, I'm not going to do any introductions. Everybody knows our delegation, Representative Kito, Representative Munoz, and Senator Egan, and we are very thankful that they were willing to participate in tonight's conversation about the fiscal future of Alaska. And the first thing we wanted to start with is give them each about 5 minutes just to reflect on both of the panels, what they have said. One, what Director Pat Pitney said. Two, what our economic panel said and what the analysis that they've made. Do you have anything to add from your viewpoint as being legislators and listening to a lot of this last session and then again in the interim? So let's start. And Cathy, I'll let you start. And I know that you've done a survey and you wanted to kind of get a little bit on that first.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you, Bruce Botello, for organizing this very informative forum. It's great. And Pat Pitney, that was an excellent presentation. Really appreciate your work. And all of you for showing up. This is great. I think this is the most well-attended forum that has happened statewide. So it shows that Juneauites are very much invested and very engaged in what's happening. In anticipation of tonight's event, I put together a survey which was modeled after the Rasmussen survey, which is available at the back of the room. But I took 5 or 6 questions from the survey, and we made it available through our website and also promoted it through KINY. And I wanted to share those results with you. It gives a really good snapshot of what Juneauites are thinking. Approximately 400 Juneauites participated in the survey, and I wanted to be sure to share the results with you tonight. So if we'll just get started, Crystal. First of all, just as an opener, and you've heard many of the statistics tonight in the presentation from Pat, the budget of the constitutional budget reserve balance at the end of the FY16 year will be approximately $7 billion. That account requires a 3/4 vote of the legislature of both bodies to access that fund. In the earnings reserve account in FY15, there is approximately $6.1 billion. That figure will increase to around $7 billion by the end of the fiscal year. The earnings reserve account is currently available on a straight majority vote. So those funds are available for appropriation to help with the budget situation. Any change in management of the permanent fund in the way that the corpus of the account is managed would require a constitutional amendment and a vote of the people. Another very salient statistic, it was mentioned earlier that we're about 500,000 barrels of oil a day. As of the 27th of September, we were at 486,000 barrels, down from 10 years ago, 1.6 billion. So you could see it's been a very precipitous drop in our oil revenue. So as I said, we had approximately 400 participants, 380. It was evenly split, 383 evenly split between the Valley and downtown. And the first question, how concerned are you with the state's current budget shortfall? The vast majority of respondents responded extremely concerned. How should the Alaska legislature address the budget shortfall? The majority of respondents answered that a combination of spending cuts and new revenue was necessary, 50%, and mostly new revenue, 32%. So when you add those two, a combination and new revenue, we get over 80% of the respondents favoring a combination or new revenue. And then I asked, select the perspective that closest matches your view on the budget shortfall. Is your approach to tighten the belt, cut government, or is your approach that new revenue is what we need? 79% responded new revenue. If the state eliminated all non-essential programs and it still wasn't enough to cover the budget shortfall, would you support use of part of the excess earnings of the permanent fund while protecting the dividend? Strongly supporting or strongly supporting, or, let's see, supporting but not strongly, was 75%, combining 47 and 28. The next question has to do with the state sales tax. Again, it's a lower level of support, but the majority did support, 52%. A state income tax, the majority, again, supported this concept, 39% strongly, 19% do support, for a combination of support of about 58%. And then putting a cap on the yearly permanent fund dividend, 64% support or strongly support. The next question has to do with reducing the tax credits. We heard that they have been reduced this year to $500 million. There's still opportunity possibly to bring that down, and we'll work with the administration on that. But the majority, 59% strongly support, and an additional 16% support, for a total of 75%. And this next question has to do with capping the permanent fund. 68%? 68% do support a cap on the permanent fund. And then the final question was, would you participate in tonight's forum? And 65% of the respondents responded favorably. So thank you very much.
And Senator, we're going to let Representative Kito go next, and we'll have you last. Okay, Representative Kito, you can do it from there, or you can come up here.
Thank you, John. I think I can do it from this position. And I was thinking about great presentations and actually a lot of thought-provoking ideas. And I do think what Greg Erickson said is important. We do have a sustainable future. We are going to be Alaskans. We're going to be in Alaska for the future. What Alaska looks like 10 years from now, we don't know. We hope it actually is robust and strong, and that's what I think our job as legislators is to do, try and figure out how we can chart a course through this situation, which is low revenues, and get to a point where we maybe, hopefully, do get a gas line and we have additional revenues that kind of help support that. I do have a little bit of a concern that our savings, as Pat Pitney mentioned, are not going to be enough to get us from here to 2025 when we expect first gas. So between the time, and I'm concerned also that if we go too far into our savings, we're going to be in a situation where, as was mentioned, we're not going to have the credit or the ability to go out and get financing to build a gas line. So we do have to make sure that we still have our economy moving forward as we look to try and get to a natural gas pipeline. What we didn't hear last legislature was any discussion of how we deal with filling a $3 billion gap. What we have heard tonight and what we hadn't heard in some of the other forums is we're not going to do that with cuts. We can't afford in this state to provide public services on a budget with $2.2 billion of state revenue, or 1.8, I guess, with the $50 barrel oil prices. But in the legislature, and while we have not had hearings on some of these other components, we've had a lot of discussion about budget cuts. There are pieces of legislation out there that other people have introduced, and with this list, I'm not advocating for any particular one, but I'm saying we need to have in our legislature a robust discussion about how do we make sure we can get to 2025, get to the point where we do have additional revenues from a gas line. But there is a bill that's a modified percent of market value bill that's in. There's a school tax bill. There's an income tax bill. There's an oil production tax bill. There has been discussion from the governor about what do we do with the tax credits. How do we make sure in the tax credits that we're providing incentives to oil companies so that they're drilling and increasing production, and that we're not putting so much into tax credits that we're not receiving that revenue back? And I think the governor's started that discussion already. He's got a piece of legislation that we're expecting to see in special session, the reserves tax. I don't have a position one way or the other on that, but I'm interested in finding out with that, where does he see the incentive to try and make sure that the gas line can move forward in a timely fashion. So there are a lot of pieces that are already actually in legislation. I think it's going to be up to us as legislators as we go into the next legislative session to sit down, be statesmen, stateswomen, and have a discussion about how do we make sure that as many Alaskans as possible can contribute to a positive economy, and hopefully we don't get into a situation where we wait until our economy crashes and then try and have to rebuild it. So I think the governor has taken that first step in trying to perform the best he can to have a soft landing. I think it's up to us to try and make sure that we can get to that soft landing.
Thank you. Senator Egan.
Yeah, thank you, Chancellor. I still don't understand why we're here at the podium, because we're here like you're here to listen and garner information about how we handle the issues that are facing our state right now in a severe budget crisis. The thing that concerns me, I don't think a lot of Alaskans understand how severe it is, and I'm very proud of my district. We understand. Look at the turnout. We have more people here in Juneau than attended in our second largest city. And we should be proud of that, because we're concerned about how we're going to survive. And you have to remember that the bulk of our employee base in this city is state. So when you cut an employee, maybe you cut a job at Subway, maybe you cut a job at Foodland, because it's a trickle-down effect. And we have to be very concerned about that. And different regions have different views on how we evaluate what Budget Director Pitney talked about: sales tax, income tax, all kinds of ideas to tackle our fiscal crisis. People in Anchorage hate income tax. Well, no wonder. They don't have an income tax. People in Fairbanks hate income tax. Why? They don't have an income tax. However, they pay, in some service areas, close to 20 mills. And we're griping here in Juneau at 10.5? Doesn't make any sense to me. But we have to remember that we're just a small pod in this whole great pie that is running the state, or living in this state. And every different region has completely different views. So, back to Juneau. Non-residents in our state have 20% of statewide jobs. 20% of statewide jobs. You know how many here? 30%. 30%. And they supply 15% of our community's income. We talk about sales tax. Anchorage doesn't have one, Fairbanks doesn't have one. They have a higher millage rate on property tax. I think it's much fairer to have a sales tax and leave sales tax up to municipalities, but that's for us in the legislature to decide, I guess. But tourists pay sales tax, but it hurts the poor more when they have to pay a sales tax. But the sales tax liability should be left, I believe, to municipalities, not to the voters of this state. So, sorry, I got off on an issue that I am very fond about, because I was mayor of this city and an assembly member for 9 years. So I understand how municipal assistance and state revenue sharing and how cities got screwed, by the state, and I think we're tired of it. And so communities like Juneau have to stick up for what's going on. However, Bill Keithley, my final comment is, I really applaud you when you talked about a hub for a university system. President Gamble, when he was appointed president of the university system, didn't know anything about Juneau. And he came down here, and Pat Gamble was enthralled about our campus. And when President Gamble retired as president of the University of Alaska system, he said, Juneau is the crown jewel, so we'll accept Juneau as the head of the university system. Thank you, Chancellor.
Okay. So as a final question, and I know we're just about run out of time, the last three, but we'll go for like 1 minute apiece for each of you. There was a particular question about the impacts to Southeast, and we know that there's a disproportionate part of our economy that would be impacted by state budget cuts. So that being the case, in the case that we have a limited power structure in Southeast for across the state, as Senator Egan was mentioning, how would you see working together to try to diminish that impact, or to at least make that, in the sense that Sam, you said soft landing. So why don't we start with Sam? Go ahead, Representative Kito.
So I think one of the key things that was mentioned by one of the panelists, Jim Calvert, had talked about the size of the Alaska Marine Highway System subsidy. And one of the things I think we can do in Southeast to make sure everybody in the state knows that we're serious about working and moving forward is to work very closely with Department of Transportation, develop a 20-year horizon long-range plan for the Marine Highway System, figure out how to make sure that system is providing the services that we need throughout coastal Alaska in an efficient manner, and have a long-range plan for vessel replacement and operations, so that the rest of the state sees we are serious about trying to operate more efficiently and less expensively, especially for that amount of money that is a general fund support for the Marine Highway System. And the Marine Highway System does, and I think education-wise, make sure people understand that it does serve and support the rest of the state. It's not just a Southeast operational component.
Representative Munoz.
Thank you, John. Well, the population of Southeast is roughly 10% of the state's population, and our representation in the legislature, unfortunately, has declined. When I started not too many years ago, we had 2 more members in the legislature. We had an additional senator and another representative. Our population has not kept up with, the growth areas in the Mat-Su, for instance. So that's politically, that's a concern for us. It has been mentioned that the Marine Highway is very important to our region, to our economy. The Ketchikan shipyard is another economic engine in Ketchikan and lower Southeast. I think it's very important that we continue to work with the university and be sure that our young people are trained for the job opportunities in this economy and in this region. And we know that those are marine jobs, we know they're fisheries jobs, we know they're going to be in healthcare. And I think the university is responding well to those challenges. Just recently at the Regents meeting here in Juneau, a 2-year marine technology degree was approved at the Ketchikan campus. It's things like that, I think, that are going to really help us in the long term to keep our young people trained and working in this economy. Thank you.
Senator Egan.
Yeah, thank you, John. I agree with everything that Sam and Cathy said, but we have to keep reminding ourselves we're a different region. That's my focus, because when we get out of Juneau, it's a totally different ballgame. And we have to, work our rear ends off to make sure that we're included in the negotiations for budget negotiations that are going to be going on in this session of the legislature. And you folks provide our staff and us input on how we can best define how Southeast as a region fights against what I like to call Rail Belt Alaska. It's us and rural Alaska. It's a horrible thing to say, but we're now rural Alaska, because as Cathy pointed out, We had a representative go bye-bye, a senator go bye-bye. Now we're totally at a loss, and we've formed in the Senate what's called a coastal caucus because we had no say at all. Now we have some say, but all regions that aren't represented by the rail belt are invited to stick together.
Well, I want to thank the three of you for being here and for commenting. I also want to thank everybody who has come tonight, and I encourage you to continue your conversations and your input into this. The governor certainly has reached out across the state wanting input from citizens, but as well, the local legislators have reached out, and they want your input as well as these things develop in the legislature. It's going to take a lot of input from citizens like yourself to make sure that we end up with a soft landing where we really do come out of this in 10, 15 years without totally damaging our economy. So I think it's very important for all of us here to just stay engaged and keep giving input. So thank you for being here, and we really appreciate it.